Hi, my name is Matthew. I just was asked to give you a little bit of update on how to actually and what is important with regards to designing labels, especially when we're talking about labels that actually do fall under the Therapeutic Good Administration regulations. In general, it's very, very simple. There are just a couple of very important things that we have to keep in mind when you design any of the labels. Just make sure you basically just cover a couple of them, and I'll show a couple of examples because that's probably is the best way to do it. Make it a bit smaller. What I use all the time is actually Illustrator. It's much easier for us to manipulate everything in Illustrator, and it's easier to actually work on. A lot of labels that we design actually got lots of different graphics, so it's much easier. When you're going to be designing your labels, it will be a bit easier because it's obviously going to be just one type of branding and we're just going to copy it across the different ones. But a couple of things you have to remember. It doesn't matter what kind of size of a label it is. When we design label, we have to remember that it needs to fit any size. And when I say any size, there are products that we pack in a tiny little bottles that the label will not be bigger than 35 or 40 millimeter high, and probably about 120 wide millimeters, that is. That means that it basically is a very tiny label that requires all the important aspect to be still on it. When I talk about important aspect, there is a few things that needs to be on the label, and the most important are the best before, so basically the due date needs to be on every single label. The nutritional panel, so all this table, it doesn't have to be in the form of a table, so if it's a tiny little label, we actually change that into just a text written one after the other. But all the information needs to be there included. Active ingredient list, which is per serve, that needs to be just listed. Sometimes if we got bigger space, and for example when we're going to be doing a protein powder, which is a massive label, it will be huge relatively to all other ones. We've got enough space to really list all the ingredients with all their actually nutritional values plus the quantities actually of the ingredient within the one serve, which is very good. But obviously it applies only to big labels. That's where you can play. By law, it's not required. So when we play with the design, we can actually just list them like I have here. And then there is this little address that really is a key. It needs to stay there. It cannot go away. Now, somewhere on the label, we need to have that statement: formulated supplementary sports foods. Or if it's a TGA listed product, there will be actually a number, OSTIL number, that needs to be placed somewhere on the label. It really doesn't matter where on the label. It could be somewhere on the back. It could be somewhere on on the side. It could be straight in the front, like I have here, for example. But it really is irrelevant where you're going to place it as long as it is on the label. The same applies to the net grams value. We have to show how much product is inside actually the net value of the product. If it's a capsules, obviously it needs to list the number of capsules or soft gels or tablets. On the left side, as you can see, there is a bit of writing. Now the writing we can adjust based on the size of the label. So if it's a big label, we can put way more information on it. If it's a small label, then we basically can put obviously less. There are a few things that needs to stay there, which is a serving suggestion. That's a one thing that needs to be there. We need to have some kind of a serving suggestion, and obviously all the relevant warnings. Now the warnings depend on the ingredients that are in a product. So for you designing a label, it's really tricky because you will not know how much space you need for warnings. Sometimes when we're talking about products that actually have some influence on blood pressure especially, the warnings are just humongous, and unfortunately there are fixed wording designed by TGA and we cannot change it. We just have to place it on the label. This is something that needs to have space. So when you design the label, just keep in mind that those two side panels are pretty much fixed. You cannot play too much with it. The only play area really is the front of the panel and the backgrounds. Now, when it comes to the backgrounds, I'm going to show you one other which probably is the extreme. That's the how far you can go. And I wouldn't recommend going any further than that because this is already probably on the border. The law states that it needs to be readable. Now, there is obviously a different different opinions what's readable and what's not. In this particular case, it needs to be basically, something that you can read. As you can see, there is a black text on this grass, which is hard to read already. It actually comes up better when we print it, so it's easier to read. But in general, this is probably the furthest you can go with kind of actually the text. It needs to be readable. Now, when it comes to the size of the text, there is a specific law again. It needs to be readable, but you cannot be smaller than 5.5 points. Now that depends, that's based on Arial. So if obviously different fonts are different sizes, and 5.5 might be different in Helvetica or whatever else. And it cannot use actually a sign writing. For all the information on the sign, it cannot be actually, handwriting. Fonts you cannot use for actually the important information on the label. The middle part, as much as you want, the names of the products, logos, whatever else, that's fine. The sides are very important. They need to be in a normal readable font, no smaller than equivalent to Arial 5.5 points. 5.5 is very small, so in most cases we find. Like here, I don't even know how I have 7 points here, and it's a relatively not a big label. When it comes to the really big protein labels, we probably use like 7 or 8 as a maximum, because then we try to put as much text as we can, so actually the product sells better, it's got more information on it. Again, when it comes to design, a total flexibility. Now, it is important to remember that images very often actually explain things, so you cannot actually have an image that will suggest that this product will cure cancer or something like that. That's the things that we need to be very careful, because we're going to be straight away dumped if we're going to do something like that. So the claims are not only on the products, but the images are actually treated as claims as well. So if we put any image on a product, we have to be careful what the image represents and actually how it can be interpreted. So that's more or less the most important. Now, in general, it's very important for you to know as well that for printing, the way how we print is very different to offset printing. We do not really require any bleed, because the labels are printed actually to the edge 100%, but it's always good to leave about 2-3 mils. I always do that. It just makes it safer and actually looks nicer. I don't like labels that are entirely, especially when something important as text goes straight to the edge, it doesn't look good. So the colors obviously the colors go across and they can be printed to the edge, but they leave the bleed of about 2 millimeters, and it's easier to play with it. Now, it's easier for us. Obviously, we use CMYK, so all the colors needs to be in CMYK. All the images needs to be converted to CMYK if they're not already. Otherwise, it won't be printed properly. The other important thing is the format of the files. Now we've designed everything in PDF editables in Illustrator, for the one main reason that any change that we apply to the label is automatically saved. We don't have to re-export it, do anything with it. And unfortunately, the printers we use do not work with Illustrator or any actually Adobe software. So it needs to be printed from Preview, like we're using Preview, but obviously from any other one. Any reader, PDF reader, you can actually use to print the labels, other than actually the proper editing software, which is kind of weird, but that's how it works. So we actually like PDF, so when you design it, it's best to actually save it as a editable PDF with all the editable capabilities, and that's the best way for us to work on labels. Now, if you're going to have any questions, any further questions, that's the very basics. So keep in mind, you have to make sure that every label that you design and the design you put in is scalable. So it's going to look on a tiny label as good as on a massive label. Obviously, the massive label gives more space to play with. So keep in mind always on the small one, because the small ones are the hard ones to fit everything in. So when there is a massive logo on a big one, it respectively should be actually, at least scaled down to the small one, but then it leaves very little space for everything else that really is required on that label. So that's the very basics. Now, if you're going to have any questions, feel free to call me anytime. It's very easy to to just get an advice, and it's there if you need it. Other than that, I assume that should be self-explanatory, really. The rest should be easy, and we're obviously going to go through a couple of first ones, and if there will be something else that I need to mention, then obviously I will. Thanks.